Hi everyone, welcome back to our channel. Today we are in Israel, in the lovely city of Tel Aviv, and we are in the office of Barnea Law Firm, and together with our host, Zvi Gabbay. He is a specialist in financial regulation, financial compliance, enforcement, right?
Right, that's right.
The expert in Israeli regulations and global regulations, and he is helping startups here in Israel and elsewhere to be compliant and to build up compliance structure. We had a previous video which was about FTX collapse. We have concentrated in that video on, let's say, psychological side of the problem, why such companies collapse. But there is also another aspect, which is regulatory aspect. So how to navigate for a global business, which is most of the IT businesses, most of the IT financial businesses, startups they are addressing the global audience. How they could navigate in the regulatory landscape, which is uncertain. Zvi, what do you think about this?
I call it the Fintech tragedy, right? You have innovators that come up with wonderful technologies that are innovative, that will take the financial industry one step further. And obviously, these entrepreneurs and these companies, they look at the citizens of the world as their potential citizens. The problem is, the tragedy is that in the financial sector, there's regulation. There always is. And regulation, almost by definition, is not global. It's jurisdiction by jurisdiction. And if you're definitely a small company, but even if you're a big company, going through this exercise of making sure you're fully compliant with financial regulation in each and every country in the world, it's literally impossible. And what we find is that regulation, that by nature is supposed to protect, is intended to protect consumers, in effect is blocking, in many cases, innovation. So typically the way to do this, and this is how we always advise our clients, is pick a jurisdiction. Let's try to make it big enough client base so that it's not esoteric, so that you're not wasting your time going through the regulatory hoops and then ending up with a license that doesn't really help you, and start. And then that will enable the company to take off. And then I think the idea is to identify additional jurisdictions and to start adding to your license portfolio, right? Your jurisdiction portfolio, additional jurisdictions, until you have a nice solid business that covers significant economies and that will allow you to really live up to what you're aspiring to achieve.
When it comes to certain industries, such as the inherently global industries, globalized industries, for example, CFDs or crypto, they are looking for some kind of easy jurisdiction at the moment for what they call usually global license. So, what jurisdictions are right now on the table usually? You would not advise Israel, right?
I would not advise Israel. As you can imagine, Hebrew is not a very popular language around the world. So you want to go to a jurisdiction that speaks English, so that you have a language that can cater to a significant amount of people, and that the standards there they're not too low, that they're real regulation. This may sound a little puzzling, right? Because if you're a business starting off and you're looking for that easier route, right? The route of least regulatory resistance, why would you want to go to a place that has serious regulation? It's in my mind, it's a must.
Yeah.
Because otherwise you're going to a place where regulation is just a joke.
Yeah.
And if it's a joke, then it's a waste of time. It's a waste of time and a waste of money. It could be not a lot of time and not a lot of money, and it's still a waste.
Look at FTX case. They picked Bahamas.
Bahamas, right.
Yeah, which is a nice place to live, and also the regulation was kind of like a joke.
That's right.
So it's not a waste, or is it?
In my mind, it's a waste.
Why?
When you go to places that, again, the regulatory requirements are a joke, everyone knows that.
Yeah.
So it doesn't really help. And it doesn't really allow you to say, I have regulation, because in effect, you're not really regulated, right? So, and when you're not really regulated, you don't act as if you're regulated. People don't self-impose on themselves regulation. That doesn't happen. So if you want to be regulated, go to a place where there's real regulation. Now, the downside of going to the Bahamas, of going to some island somewhere where they have a license, it just doesn't mean anything, is that other jurisdictions and sometimes sophisticated business partners and service providers, they know that what you have is a joke. Okay. So they can't rely on it. And in many cases, it's a warning for them. If you went out and set up shop in some place like that, then that doesn't give us any protection. It doesn't mean anything to us.
In terms of crypto regulation, how do you find these trends right now? Where is it all going?
This is an industry that developed dramatically and is looking for the bridges to connect to the conventional system, right? Because there's a limit to how much you can do in parallel, right? Every once in a while, you need the bridge. You need to be able to convert value assets from the blockchain-based system to the conventional one, and from the conventional back to the blockchain-based. And these bridges can only be built if there's regulation. They can only be built if the conventional, heavily regulated system can trust the parallel universe. And here, what you see, definitely when you look at Europe and the United States, is two very different approaches. European regulators went through a gap analysis exercise. They took a very long time, and they came up with MiCa, and MiCa, in my mind, is brilliant. Because what it does is it relies on all of the familiar principles. And it's basically saying, we have brokerage, we'll do brokerage. We have exchanges, we do exchange. We don't start from zero. We know how to regulate brokers. We're looking at, on the one hand, the unique challenges that are presented by this technology. And on the other hand, in many cases, these technologies solve problems in the existing system. So what MiCa does is it takes the regulatory regime for exchanges and makes the relevant adaptations. Takes the relevant regulation for clearing and makes the relevant adaptation. What the Americans did is they said it's very similar, but they went one step further. They said it's identical. I want to be, and I know that this is something, again, I'm an ex-regulator. I know regulators like to say that. Regulators like to say, I'm agnostic to technology.
Yeah.
I don't care if a share is a piece of paper, or a share is an email, or a share is a virtual asset. I don't care. Regulation is the same. And basically what they said is, the SEC is saying it all the time. They said it also in the Coinbase and Binance complaints. They said we have the Howey test, which is, from the 40s of the previous century, and when people didn't have refrigerators at home. Okay, it's not even. I'm not even talking about phones, right? And basically they said it's fully applicable, and because it's fully applicable, Coinbase and Binance are violating the law because they are platforms where you can exchange tokens, and those tokens are securities, and if those tokens are securities, then they need to be regulated properly. I think that what the Europeans did is the right way. I think that what the Americans, what the SEC did, is very aggressive.
Look, we don't need more digital currency. We already have digital currency. It's called the US dollar. It's called the euro. It's called the yen. They're all digital right now.
There is a serious risk of killing the blockchain industry in the United States. They're not going to kill the blockchain industry. That's going to continue. They're killing it in the United States. And I think it goes contrary to everything the SEC said for in the past few years, where basically they're saying there's a lot of good, there's a lot of bad. By the way, they're correct there. There's a lot of bad. That's true. And we don't want to kill the good. We just want to address the bad. But the way they're doing it is they're killing the good as well. I think, again, I'm not a prophet and I don't know. But what I think is MiCa will be like GDPR. It will become the global standard. And once it's the global standard, because you're right, it's a global industry. And once it's the global standard and everyone complies with MiCa, then practically you'll be good everywhere. And I'm hoping that in the United States, they'll catch up. Because I know that, at least from the Congress hearings that were held in this regard, that they're concerned. They're concerned that there's no regulation. There's a huge public sentiment that is not comfortable with the premise of regulation by enforcement. I mean, in many cases, I read the Coinbase complaint, for example, that the SEC filed, and I think Coinbase is a good example because they're not saying that there was any funny stuff happening there. They're not saying that there was any fraud. Basically, what they're saying is, on this platform, there were securities that were traded, and you need to be licensed to be able to do that, and they didn't have the right licenses. And they go on and saying that in the traditional financial industry, you have brokers that typically have their own license and their own regulatory permits, and you have exchanges, and they have their own, and you have clearinghouses, and they have their own, and these are all done by 3 separate entities, separately regulated. And what they're saying is Coinbase is doing all 3. And I must tell you, and that's the way, it's always separated. So they're doing the 3,
so they should,
is basically what the SEC is implying is by doing all 3, there are conflicts of interest, and that's not a good thing. And I must say that when I was reading it, what came to mind, and maybe this analogy is not so nice, but what came to mind is I invented a car, and I come to you, and you're saying, but I have a horse and carriage, and my horse is harnessed, right, with ropes. I use it with ropes, and with this car, you don't have a rope, right? That's, and my horse, it eats grain, and your car, it doesn't eat grain, right? There's gas. So somehow it's like when they're saying, and these 3, industries are always typically, 3 businesses are typically done differently. Yes, they were typically done differently, but reality is changing, and technology is providing real innovation. And maybe conventional conflicts of interest can be addressed by technology as opposed to separation of entities.
Chinese walls.
Right. I mean, it's going and saying this needs to be separated just because that's the way you're used to seeing things. In my mind, it's not a good enough answer. And it fails to see the benefits that these technologies bring with them. Right? And in many cases, you'll see the arguments on why certain tokens that are mentioned, that are classified by the SEC in these complaints as securities, you'll see good arguments saying why it's not. One of these arguments, in many cases, is decentralization. Right? Now, the SEC, does the SEC have the tools? Did it conduct the analysis to address true arguments of decentralization? I mean, basically what they're saying now is you're saying it's decentralized, but it's not really. Maybe the SEC is right, but maybe it's not. And if it's not right, then think of the ramifications of them allowing themselves to say this.
I think this is the crucial point, really, because I know that many innovators and many entrepreneurs, they are struggling with this idea of decentralization, that they are afraid that the regulators will not accept their arguments, that that they are have a decentralized system.
That's right.
As a lawyer, do you have an idea how to convince regulators?
Look, I think that at the end of the day, it's a factual question, right?
Yeah.
So this is as a lawyer, this is a question that I'd ask my client.
Yeah.
And I'd say, look, what I'm doing now is I'm closing my eyes and I'm pretending that I'm the regulator, and I want you to demonstrate to me,
Yes.
right? Prove to me
Yeah.
that what you did here is truly decentralized, which means that under no circumstances, not indirectly, not dramatically indirectly, not, in the dark, quietly at night, you don't control this protocol.
Yes.
And if you don't control this protocol, then I believe that it should be classified as decentralized. Now I can tell you, in MiCa, for example, MiCa recognizes the fact that there are different types of tokens, that not every token is a security. And I think that the SEC's focus on this almost obsession, everything is a security, they're missing out on the real point. It's the question is not, is it a security? Yes or no. And then you're pushed to, right, when it's a binary question, then obviously if you say no, then that means there's no regulation. No, the right way of doing it is the European way. Here, in many cases, here they did it an excellent job, where basically they're saying there are a number of types of tokens. There's specific questions you can ask yourself, and based on that, you classify the token. Some tokens will be securities, not all of them, and some will not be securities, but they'll also be regulated, not as securities, as something else. And recognizing that the world is a complex place and that there could be different types of tokens, I think is the right approach, is the right way of doing things.
Opening bank accounts is a complex problem for cryptocurrency providers. So in Europe, for example, you have very little amounts of spaces where you could have a bank account dealing with crypto. One of the examples is Cyprus, for example. In Cyprus, you are allowed to have a license dealing with crypto, but at the same time, you are not allowed to have a bank account. So from your perspective, you probably have clients like those. How do you advise them where to pursue an opportunity to open a bank account right now? What are the spots?
So we know Swiss. You have Gibraltar. You have Cayman. You have other places. You also have the Far East, but also in Europe.
Yeah, that's very interesting because again, we have an example of Revolut. For example, Revolut is dealing with some crypto tokens. They have a European license, which is I think Lithuanian license at the moment. They were pursuing UK license, but we know it's right now a problematic point. So it seems that even in Europe, you're able actually to do it already. And it's
you are. I think. When we talk about the main concern in these cases is AML. That's the main concern for the convention for banks.
Yes.
And I think that both regulators and banks, if you're able to demonstrate to the bank in a proactive way that you implemented an effective way of conducting real due diligence on the tokens, real due diligence on your customers, real due diligence on where the tokens come from. In many cases, blockchain token KYC is more effective than the standard KYC.
Yes.
You have more tools. It's the way I would like to think of it is you don't have a client coming in with a briefcase with $1 million in cash, and then you don't know where he came. So the conventional way would be to question that person and to get their answers and maybe to have some supporting documents and and then you decide. Here you have money coming from a wallet. You have a digitized way of saying where the money came from, right? It's like the cash literally tells you where it was.
Yeah.
So theoretically, we should be in the position where actually soon, again, depending on the development of these technological tools, banks will prefer to open accounts where the source is crypto that is confirmed to be clean, as opposed to
with chain analysis
that's
reporter
right,
and stuff.
like chain analysis, as opposed to opening an account where the money is, somewhere in the past, cash, that I don't know where it came from.
P2P providers. That's another point. You were talking that it's possible to make a absolutely clear analogy between, let's say, traditional finance and crypto. One of the things where it is not quite clear how to make this analogy is P2P providers, because what they say, we are decentralized. That's just a protocol. It's not like people that are doing something, no little smurfs or something like that. It's just a protocol. We wrote a protocol. We just maintain the protocol. We don't have any connection to the money that is going there.
Right.
So, and at the same time, European regulators tell them, you have a team. We don't care if you have a team, then you're a financial institution. Maybe you have such cases like that. Maybe some P2P providers are approaching you.
Look,
so what do you tell them?
In law school, there's a saying, right? Difficult cases make bad law, right? This is a difficult case, right? Decentralization presents a real challenge. Financial regulation throughout the years is based on regulating the intermediary, right? It's very difficult for me to go to individuals, but if I have a bank, that's great. Then I can pile all my regulatory requirements on the bank, and the bank is the entity that has to now conduct due diligence into what the individual clients are doing, right? Where theoretically, this was before we had global AML requirements, right? This is the revolution that the FATF and global AML requirements brought. It's basically we're saying, we get it. There are always going to be bad people. We won't be able to regulate people.
Yes.
But we can regulate the intermediaries, right? So if you're a broker, if you're a bank, if you're a service provider, then you're going to be regulated. I'm going to look at you. And with decentralization, there's no more you, right? So what regulators are trying to do is basically, but this in my mind, they're stuck in the paradigm of there's got to be someone we can talk to, right? So let's look at the team that developed it and let's look at them. Now, sometimes regulators will be right to point their finger at that development team, because sometimes that development team will say, oh, this is decentralized. But they have their control, right? And sometimes they hold enough tokens where they have a real stake, and that real stake will enable them to influence the platform. That's fine. And in those cases, it's not really decentralized, and it's fine to use that paradigm. But that's, I think, making our life easy. I think that what we need to do, and this is something that the European regulators are looking at, and I don't think they're answers just yet, is how do we address the real AML concerns, the real regulatory concerns in the truly decentralized protocols. And that's something where, if you ask me, it's truly technological. The solution has to be truly technological. There's gonna be, I think, there need to be features built into the protocol that will provide a certain level of comfort. So I think that it's not only regulators need to change their paradigm about who they're regulating, it's the market needs to change its paradigm about who the regulators are and what regulation is, right? It's just like who's going to regulate AI, right?
Yeah, that's it. Yeah.
AI is going to regulate AI. No human being will be able to catch up.
So looking at the Israeli market, and Israel as a jurisdiction, you're saying that Israel is sometimes behind the general standards of regulation, maybe some overly skeptical, but there are great examples of great businesses here that were created here and then became global.
That's true.
One of those examples, I guess, from the top of my head would be eToro.
Absolutely.
What was their example of development from a small company and
Right.
to become a...
So I think eToro is a good example that shows a number of things. First of all, from a very early stage, they weren't interested in being regulated in Israel, and they took deliberate action to make sure that they don't violate any local rules, because regulation in Israel is tough, right? That it started off as a CFD platform, and sometimes this is a type of industry or a type of business that, in many cases, actors and regulators may not necessarily see the benefits of. But I think that on this platform, the whole notion of social trading and the tools that eToro developed, in many cases, redefined the financial industry. And I think that this type of innovation shows why fintech companies are so important. And they're so important to specific jurisdictional financial industries and to the global financial industries. This is what will make the financial industries move forward.
Well, I mean, I'm out of questions. So this was Zvi Gabbay, and thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much. Good luck.